Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Big Nickel IDP Podcast. I am your host, Jon Macri, fantasy analyst at PFF. Well, we're getting closer to the start of the season, which means that drafts will be firing up more and more over the next couple of months. So there is no better time to give you, the good people, some IDP breakout candidates to target in drafts. So get ready to take them in like Joey Chestnut gobbling glizzies on America Day. Let's get it. All right. Big one today. We got the top IDP breakout candidates for this season, and joining me to help break them all down, one of my favorite IDP writers from DLF and IDP guys, the very awesome, very smart, great knower of football, Mr. Jase Abbey. Jase, what's up, man?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm excited to be on, John. Big Nickel's a favorite of mine. Has been for a while now. So yeah, just pretty excited to come on here and talk about IDP with you. It's gonna be pretty cool. I think breakouts as well. One of my favorite topics. I think correctly sort of identifying breakouts can make a difference, kind of between a successful season and a not quite as successful season in fantasy. I quite often go back and look at sort of retrospectively look at my fantasy roster and those of other people's, especially the champ if I haven't won it myself. And without fail, you can always pick out 2, 3, maybe more guys if you've got deeper rosters who have made that big difference, I think. Great to be on here talking about a pretty cool subject with you.
Yeah, man. No, I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate the kind words as well. And yeah, breakouts is always a fun one, right? It's kind of looking at guys that maybe haven't performed up to their full potential yet, but kind of picking this being the season that they start to at least get to that range. So it's always fun. And yeah, we got a pretty good list here, I think. And yeah, I mean, we're gonna try to hit. We're gonna try for 100% success rate this year because I feel pretty confident about all these guys. It's hard to kind of argue against them. I think. I mean, there'll always be somebody that disagrees, but that's okay. We'll try to sell these guys as we believe in them, and we'll get into it here. So. Again, we're talking breakouts, players who we believe are going to finish significantly higher in their yearly fantasy finish and increase their production, and hopefully keep that going beyond this season as well. So we got a bunch of IDPs across all positions. We're talking linebackers, edge rushers, defensive tackles, safeties, even a couple corners. So buckle in. Without further ado, let's fire it up and kick things off on Abbey Road with Jase's first breakout. Jase, who do you got here?
Okay, yeah. So we're going to kick it off with Ernest Jones. There's been a lot of buzz about him in recent years, even going back to last year, right? When we knew he'd play sort of second fiddle to Bobby Wagner. Wagner's now gone, and there's nobody standing in Jones' way. In fact, the Rams' defensive roster is looking a bit sparse from top to bottom. But yeah, Jones played 723 snaps last year behind Wagner and produced the kind of season that got us all pretty excited, finishing with 109 combined tackles. The tackling efficiency was so good that I think we'd be sensible to expect some regression to the mean there. But even if it does, his increased snap count, I think, will absorb that drop off. So one thing I also like about Jones, didn't make a lot of splash plays last year. No sacks, 1 forced fumble, 1 interception, 1 pass breakup. I'd expect those numbers to go up with the increased play time, and just because it's sensible to expect them to increase slightly. One thing I'm a little unsure of is whether Jones is going to be assuming that role that Wagner had as a blitzer. Wagner had a handful of blitzes, 20, 30 blitzes. Wagner had 100 plus. He was in the top 5, I think, at the position. So that's something to keep an eye on because, in IDP, we don't necessarily want our linebackers blitzing all the time, but it didn't really hurt Wagner. I don't think it's really going to hurt Jones. I think he's a pretty solid choice for a breakout this year. I can't wait to see it happen. What do you think?
Yeah, he's a fun one. He's probably my top guy as well, just for the potential to break out this season at the linebacker position, at least. I mean, just one regular season so far, or one regular season game so far in his career that he's played over 90% of the team's defensive snaps. So typically playing second fiddle to somebody or splitting time at that top position, which we saw a little bit more in his rookie year. But yeah, with Wagner gone, I mean, the defense as a whole completely depleted, right? So there's nobody to really be concerned about for to take Jones's role. He's kind of proven, at least in his short time in the NFL and on those limited snaps, to be kind of a reliable IDP, even on that smaller workload. He posted an 84.3 tackling grade with just a 5.2% missed tackle rate in 2022, which, like you said, let him rack up over 100 tackles on just 66% of the team's defensive snaps. He was only one of 3 linebackers in the entire league to hit that that triple digit tackle range while playing less than 70% of the team's defensive snaps. So, like you said, the efficiency at like 15% or whatever it was, probably going to come down a little bit, but it helps him to be playing an every down role now. And then you look at the Rams defensive scheme, also has typically been one of the better defenses for linebacker tackle production because they play more zone coverages. And when, like we talked about previously in this podcast, is that zone coverages typically yield better tackle opportunities for the linebacker position. So yeah, you look at that, plus the increase in snaps, I think is going to be key for any breakout candidate. But for Jones specifically, I think it has the potential to kind of vault him into that maybe top 10 linebackers for the season.
Yep.
All right. Yeah, he's a fun one for sure. And another fun one we'll talk about here is another linebacker, this one out of Las Vegas. It is Divine Deablo. So Deablo, his 2022 season, I think, was off to a really, really good start for IDP purposes, at least. He played the lead linebacker role in the Raiders defense while averaging 87% of the defensive snaps. And he totaled 74 tackles through just a little over 7 games. So unfortunately, he had a season-ending arm injury. So that kind of put that true breakout season on hold, at least until now. That is, the Raiders linebacker room lost Denzel Perryman this offseason, and they only added Robert Spillane, who's been a career backup. So Deablo, I mean, if healthy, should not have an issue stepping right back into that LB1 role in Las Vegas. He also earned one of the better totals in tackles versus expected last season, despite playing just 463 defensive snaps. So I think that's encouraging, for a guy who's been productive regardless of the defensive scheme or what his role is within that defense. And with the Raiders kind of being one of those defenses that maybe isn't as tackle friendly for the linebacker position, it helps to know that Deablo's ability to kind of overcome that that situation can create some solid linebacker production, at least still in 2023. Again, full-time role expected, combined with a full healthy year, hopefully, to start the year. He's in a great spot to be a reliable IDP producer on a weekly basis, and someone who probably isn't likely to be drafted within the top 20 fantasy linebackers. I like him as one of the better bets to potentially get into that range by the time the season's over.
Yeah, he's a good shout. I got a bit of a soft spot for these these safety linebacker or safety converts, if you like, at linebacker. The guys that sort of fit that sort of modern mold of those fast guys that can just fly around the field, and especially if they can tackle, which in Deablo's case, he proved in his first year that he could do so. Slight drop off last year, maybe, but still fairly good for a linebacker in the NFL. I'm probably a little more worried about Spillane than you are, it sounds. I don't think Deablo's done enough to prove to me, at least, that he is that guy. But if Deablo's shown some sort of deficiencies in coverage, then Spillane is way behind. He's pretty terrible in coverage. So yeah, maybe I've taught myself around. I do like him. Like you say, he was pretty much an every down guy until the injury. So yeah, returning DC probably thinks the same about him as he did last year, I assume. So, and Deablo's talked, positively about what he spent his time doing when he was off the field last year. We take some of this stuff with a pinch of salt, but he's talked about how he spent that time learning, studying, and so on. So yeah, good call. Slight concern about Spillane, but it's not a massive one. I wouldn't be surprised to see Deablo have a career year, especially if he stays healthy. But the same can be true of everyone, right, on this list. If everyone can stay healthy, career years are probably coming.
Yeah, for sure. And that's fair for sure. I mean, Spillane, he's found a way to kind of be like a thorn in the side of other linebackers that we were hoping would be, every down players as well, whether it was, Devin Bush or Miles Jack in Pittsburgh, right? So we've seen him kind of get there. So yeah, it just depends on how the coaches view him in Las Vegas and what they think his role might be. Obviously, for me, hoping that they still see Deablo as that number one guy, which they deployed him in last year. But absolutely anything could change if Spillane does start to show out, or Deablo isn't healthy or doesn't show that potential. Then we could easily see a change here. But definitely a fair call there for Divine Deablo. So let's go to one of your picks here. Another linebacker in Tennessee. Who do you got?
So yeah, I've got Azeez Al-Shaair here. So I'll start by saying that I don't necessarily think Al-Shaair is a particularly special player. Like Deablo, or especially like Spillane, we talked about a moment ago. Al-Shaair has deficiencies in coverage, right? He hasn't shown us over the course of his career yet that he can be that guy to effectively to be a special player in coverage. But I'm mentioning him here over some of the other guys I had shortlisted, like maybe trendier names, Brian Asamoah, Pete Werner, arguably better players, because those other guys have at least some semi-capable competition for their roles. Al-Shaair wasn't given big money, only a 1-year deal. I think it was $4 million. But in redraft formats, I think there's just fewer variables with him than some of those other sexier names. So let's look at the other Titans linebackers on the roster. There's Monty Rice. I know he's generating some interest amongst the IDP community this season. And he had a prominent role towards the end of the year once David Long went down. But I can't see him earning an every down role because, again, if Al-Shaair struggles in coverage, then Rice really does. He's more of a thumper, a run stuffer. There's Jack Gibbons. He too had a bigger role in the absence of Long at times last year. Actually outsnapped Rice in the final couple of games, or 2 of the final 4 games to be exact. But I can't see him standing in Al-Shaair's way. And then there's Ben Neiman, formerly of the Chiefs, and we know what he can bring to the table. And it's not a great deal, right? Now I think Rice and maybe one of the other 2 will have a role in that defense. Shane Bowen, the DC there, has shown a propensity to hand playing time to a second linebacker, albeit not a full-time role. But I think Al-Shaair gets the nod here. I think he's got a good chance to put together a career year, perhaps even better than the year he had when Dre Greenlaw went down for the 49ers in, I want to say, 2021. Yep. So yeah, I kind of like him in redraft. Maybe not so much in dynasty.
Yeah, I'm with you for sure. I mean, like you said, that his best season was that 2021 season when Drake Greenlaw went down. So I think he just barely crossed over 100 tackles that year. So there's plenty of room for him to kind of improve upon that and have like a true breakout season. And then you mentioned some of the other Tennessee linebackers. I'm with you. I think Al-Shaair is the kind of clear starter amongst that group. I mean, you look at them and how their defense was deployed last year. They were a top 5 team in the league in dime personnel last season as well. I'd expect Al-Shaair to be the main guy to not kind of leave the field and probably be the only consistent and reliable weekly option for the Titans at linebacker if they continue to do that that deployment like that they did last season. I know, people were excited about Monty Rice because of that, strong production near the end of last year. But yeah, I'm with you. He's just not the kind of player you want maybe in an every down role for your defense if given the choice. So I think the Titans find a way to continue potentially deploying that high rate of dime personnel and then leave Al-Shaair as the only kind of every down linebacker this season. So I'm with you for sure. I do like Al-Shaair this year in Tennessee.
Yep.
All right, let's look at another linebacker here. So I'm going with Jamin Davis of the Washington Commanders. So most people know Jamin Davis. He was a first round pick in 2021, but he's mostly spent time behind Cole Holcomb as the team's secondary linebacker. Last year, after Holcomb's injury in week 7, Davis did finally get a shot at a full-time role. And I think anyways, he really kind of flourished and showed signs of what made him a first round pick at the time. It did seem like, previously Davis wasn't truly able to get into the flow of the game by coming off the field at such a high rate as a rookie. And in the early part of last season, while Holcomb was in the lineup, he did struggle significantly in coverage. However, once he got that full-time role, he appeared much more comfortable and wound up with a top 20 coverage grade at the position of 78.3, which was from weeks 8 to 17 for linebackers that played at least 50% of the team's defensive snaps. So with Holcomb, now off to Pittsburgh, and the team really only added Cody Barton in free agency, Davis, to me at least, appears to kind of be that clear top guy in Washington's defense for the first time since he was drafted, really. So I like his potential for an every down role in 2023. He'll have a shot to be, a consistent IDP asset that fantasy managers and especially dynasty managers have hoped that he could be since he was drafted in the first round a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I'm one of those people that went all in on Davis early, expecting him to play more bigger snap share than he did in those first couple of years. So I had I was a bit burnt by Davis, admittedly, but yeah, it's a strong choice. Like you say, it was all Davis when Holcomb went down. About midway through the season, started slowly, but demonstrated improvement down the stretch, which is always nice to see. Hopefully that carries over into 2023. He's got the consistency with Jack Del Rio returning as the DC, and Del Rio had some encouraging things to say about Davis earlier in the year, talking about how he was able to put together more splash plays. And this was after Del Rio's a pretty straight talker. He talked pretty disparagingly about Davis just start of last year. So that was good to see. Cody Barton, he's a slight worry. He too, played better towards the end of last year than he did earlier in the year. But I can't see him winning the job over Davis. I'd be remiss not to mention the tackle efficiency. Davis' tackle efficiency wasn't fantastic. It was pretty average. But for fantasy purposes, we care more about, snap share. Which, as you quite rightly pointed out, is working out in Davis's favor. He should be an every down guy. Should be a big performer this year.
Yeah, that's the hope, right? And we know tackle efficiency can vary from year to year as well, right? It's a little concerning when it's it's on the lower end, but hopefully, again, with more experience, we've found that the linebackers do tend to perform better over the years. They get better with more snaps and experience, and obviously the first round draft capital the team has invested in him is crucial as well. So hopefully, he can hold off Cody Barton. If not, then there's bigger problems for Jamin Davis, and we shouldn't trust him anymore. But the hope is that he should continue to be the top linebacker, or at least start the year as the top linebacker. That is for the Commanders the first time. So could be a fun one in Jamin Davis. And then we'll add a bonus name here because, again, we'd be kind of remiss to exclude a fan favorite here at the linebacker position, and that is Nakobe Dean breaking out potentially for the Philadelphia Eagles this year. I mean, most fantasy managers understood that Dean's emergence as a starter and an IDP relevant asset would require patience for year one with, the established veterans, TJ Edwards and Kaiser White locked into starting spots last year. but both Edwards and Kaiser White are both gone in free agency. So now we got this redshirt year of Nakobe Dean's kind of in the past, and he has a chance here to shine in year 2. He played just 47 defensive snaps last year. So not much to evaluate for his time so far in the NFL, but as arguably the best player on Georgia's national championship winning defense in 2021. There's plenty of kind of encouraging college tape to get IDP managers excited about his potential. We know Dean, he posted an elite defensive grades across the board in 2021 at Georgia, including a 91.8 overall grade and a 90.4 coverage grade, which again, at the highest level in college, are at least encouraging signs that he has the necessary skills to translate to the NFL. Injury concerns dropped him to the 3rd round, but all reports since he was drafted seem to indicate that he's fully healthy and ready to see more time on the field as an NFL starter. He even played the 13th most special teams snaps in the league last season, so didn't hold him back from playing there. So at least looking for some other encouraging signs that he's healthy anyways. And then Nicholas Morrow was the only other real offseason addition to the Eagles linebacker core. So the competition, I think, for the primary starting spot should be between Dean and Morrow. Early reports out of Eagles camp are that Dean is wearing the green dot on his helmet, so making him the defensive play caller on the field, which often goes hand in hand with an every down role. So it provides at least a little bit of a hint that Dean is viewed as the team's primary linebacker and allow him to hopefully come off the field at a lower rate than Morrow, who is their other expected starters. So I know a lot of people are in on Nakobe Dean this year. This isn't like a surprise pick by any means. So we do feel the same way, or at least I do anyways. How about you?
Yeah, you covered most of the bases there, John. Not just one guy ahead of him gone, but both of them. The high draft capital, the green dot. The Eagles did very little to bolster that position outside of Morrow, who I've talked about on other pods. I don't think is anything special to write about. Just a space filler for me. You covered the other points, the concerns, perhaps the reservations, the small snap share, or snap volume for 47 snaps, 46 snaps. It's ridiculously small. It's pitifully small, right? So we don't know anything about what he's going to look like as an NFL linebacker. But I trust the NFL teams out there. They know a lot more than we do. The Eagles clearly have faith in him. Again, going back to the point I made earlier about Davis, he should see a lot of snaps. How well he plays, and unless it's an absolute disaster, I can't see them pivoting to tomorrow or bringing in another veteran. There's a couple of veterans lurking out there that could throw a spanner in the works for Dean and any one of a number of these guys or linebackers on our list. But yeah, it should be Dean all the way. He sat for his season. Hopefully, it's not similar to what we see with rookie linebackers that come in and really struggle in coverage. You mentioned his fantastic coverage grade in college. Hopefully some of that, at least, transitions into the NFL. Let's wait and see. I'm excited to see what happens.
Yeah, he's definitely one to keep an eye on, because I think people were really excited about him around draft time. They had him as like the rookie LB1 prior to the draft and stuff. And very, very exciting player, obviously. So he'll be a fun one to keep an eye on. Hopefully he does stay healthy and we get a full season of data points for him, which will be fun to comb over next offseason.
Yeah.
So let's go away from the linebackers here. We covered 5 linebackers to potentially break out. I'm sure that other people have other ones that they like as well, but we're going to go to the safety position now. And who do you have as your top safety breakout?
So my top safety breakout is 1 second. Bear with me, John. Sorry, I might have to cut this bit because I thought we were going to Kyle Hamilton next. That's all good.
That's where I was going. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So so I'll leave it at pause and then we can cut back in. So my top safety breakout is Kyle Hamilton. He looked pretty damn special towards the end of the year. Really slow start. Had everyone wondering what the hell was going on. But yeah, he looked pretty fantastic towards the end of the year. PFF subscribers will know this as well as any, and obviously Ravens fans. It was blue across the board, as I think Josh and Adam covered on their pod. For a guy who only played 550 snaps, he delivered a bunch of big plays too, a couple of sacks, forced fumble, 5 pass breakups, and that's something he continued into the postseason as well, where he delivered another forced fumble. I loved him coming out, and like many, I expected him to start a little faster. But yeah, he already established a sizable role towards the end of the year with both, Marcus Williams and Chuck Clark healthily. They had three safety looks there for a while there. But now Clark, who played every down all season, remarkable really, he's gone. It's not hard to see why, you and I and others have Hamilton slotted as a top 5 safety going into 2023. What's your thoughts?
Yeah. One of my favorite ones for sure. We highlighted him early this offseason. I can't remember if it was with Evan or Jake in the buy sell episodes. It was one of those beautiful minds. We talked about buying Kyle Hamilton in Dynasty. And I highlighted him in an article even before that and talked about Chuck Clark potentially being released or traded. It happened only a few weeks after that. So Chuck Clark is gone. Like you said, he played over 1,000 snaps. He played a ton, was healthy the entire year, obviously. And then of course he tears his ACL this offseason somehow. So, but yeah, you highlighted it, the versatility, the playmaking, all of that stuff, the sacks, forced fumbles, all of those things that, he's able to do that build on more than just, tackle numbers on a weekly basis and kind of raise that upside for him. It's going to be key, right? So, if we're comparing him to like a Derwin James, he gets that comp a lot out there, but the size, the tackling ability, the pass rush prowess, ability to make big plays, everything that IDP managers could want from the safety position, it's just up to Hamilton really to make it all kind of come to fruition in 2023. Now that he has that full-time workload, and then absorbing Chuck Clark snaps is going to help a lot as well, because Chuck Clark too played about 30% of his defensive snaps in the box last season, which is key again for tackle efficiency for safeties. 73% of safeties who spent at least a third of their defensive snaps in the box last season posted above average tackle efficiency, which Hamilton has already shown that he's capable of without getting those crucial snaps as a rookie. So really encouraging stuff there for Kyle Hamilton going into year 2. I can't wait. I have him as a top 5 safety as well. So pretty excited.
Yeah. That's a good nugget you had there about the box safeties. It's something that we all talk about, we all know is true, but to hear some hard facts about it is pretty cool. I'd be talking about Hamilton even if Clark was still there. As I said, he had that bigger role going into the last sort of 5 games. I think every game in each of those 5 games, he had an increasingly large snap share in the last 5 games of the Ravens season. So. It ended up in the sort of the 90s in terms of snap share, 90% plus. So I'd be talking them up even if Clark was there, because as I say, they found a way to put Clark, Williams, and Hamilton on the field at the same time. But with Clark gone, it's Hamilton to the moon.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. I would think that, he'd still have a big role, even if Chuck Clark was there, whether he was playing in the slot or whether he was playing as a second linebacker with like Patrick Queen or somebody coming out in sub packages. I think it's going to be hard to keep him off the field for sure after what he showed last year. And then, it just reminded me of something. I meant to actually tweet that stat out about the box safeties and the tackle efficiency. By the time you're hearing this, I'll have tweeted it out at some point, so you could look at it a little bit more detail. All right, let's go to another safety. I got Ryan Neal of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So for me, at least, Neal kind of stepped up in a big way for the Seahawks last year after Jamal Adams tore his quad, and then Josh Jones came in for a little bit, couldn't really cut it as his replacement. It was then Neal who kind of stepped in and became the top safety in Seattle and became actually the highest graded safety in the league in 2022, which was pretty crazy. He posted 6 pass breakups, an interception, a sack. You're in the second highest coverage grade as well for the position at 85.7, all on just over 700 defensive snaps. So Seahawks, they're obviously prepping for Jamal Adams' return at some point this season. They signed Julian Love. They let Neal depart in free agency to potentially step up once again, this time with the Buccaneers. So Tampa Bay, they also lost safeties this year. They had 3 safeties leave who totaled over 1,800 defensive snaps between them in 2022, between Mike Edwards, Keanu Neal, and Logan Ryan, all leaving in free agency this offseason. So not only is there a significant need for a starting safety to play next to Antoine Winfield this season, but there could also potentially be more box snaps available for Neal to build on his tackle production. The Bucs were a top 10 team in the league last season in single high coverage rates, allowing one safety to play closer to the line of scrimmage. And with Winfield figuring to be one of the deeper safety option of the two, given his skill set, I think Neal should get more of the ideal IDP alignments this season. So 2022 was great for Neal. It didn't always translate to fantasy production. He ended the year with just 66 total tackles after just 10 games started, which likely had him finishing outside of like the top 50 scorers for his position in most IDP leagues. So I think coming in as the day one starter in Tampa Bay, combined with the potential to be the primary safety, to play maybe near the line of scrimmage, I think he should greatly outperform his strong 2022 season, and then provide fantasy managers a good value as well relative to his cost in most drafts.
Yeah, I love to see. I've got, again, a soft spot for undrafted free agents that establish themselves as sort of capable starters in the NFL. It's just wonderful to see, isn't it? And that, that's exactly what Neal became. A capable starter down the stretch last year after what was a slow start to his career. Again, understandable given he was an undrafted free agent, but in addition to his solid tackle efficiency, and it was solid, he demonstrated a real knack for those big plays. 6 pass breakups, a couple of forced fumbles, and also weighed in with a sack despite being rarely used as a blitzer. As you pointed out, Mike Edwards is gone, Logan Ryan's gone, Keanu Neal, if we're calling him a safety, he's gone. So there's nobody of any note really behind Winfield and Neal. Again, I challenge your listeners, if you're able to name the backups to these two, then you're doing better than I could. So yeah, I think Neal's in for a heavy workload, and that should be great for IDP purposes, especially when used in the role that we talked about here. You're right, John. It should be Winfield on the back end and Neal closer to the line of scrimmage there, mixing that up and hopefully racking up huge tackle volume. But let's wait and see. I'm very optimistic though.
Yeah, it should be fun. He's again a player that probably isn't going to cost you much in drafts at this point either. So it could be one of those really nice value picks as well. But let's talk about another safety here. A favorite of mine. Who did you put as your next breakout here for this episode?
Okay, yeah, I've gone with Kyle Duggar. Now I was a bit premature on Duggar, and I think others might have been too, for reasons I'll get into. He's a guy, he's featured on these breakout lists many times in the past, pretty much every year, and he's been able to deliver at times, but he's often fallen slightly short of sort of season-long expectations, largely due to the fact that the Patriots involved up to 4 guys at the position sometimes. He's never had more than 750 snaps. He's never surpassed 90 combined tackles. Heading into 2023, one of those 4 guys I mentioned, Devin McCourtney, is now retired. And while the Patriots drafted a hybrid type in Mapu in the 3rd round, I don't see him hurting Duggar's value much this year. Now, the only known quantities back there really for the Patriots are now Duggar, Adrian Phillips, and Jabril Peppers. Jalen Mills will obviously feature in some way, but the pecking order, and this is important, the pecking order has changed. Would you agree, John?
Yeah, for sure. I like Duggar quite a bit this year. I put him on one of my lists as well. I put him as a bounce back. So spoilers for next week as well. But I love his potential for this year. I mean, you look at, it was definitely a down year last year. And part of that just can't be helped, right? He did have a limited role in a way relative to most safeties, right? So I like him quite a bit. I mean, He's consistently improved each NFL season as well. Like you said, Devin McCourty's gone, so there's an opportunity for potentially more snaps in like a typical safety role as well, to kind of fill out that every down role versus just playing that box specialist position, which he's become known for. Contract year as well, so I think that kind of plays a factor into it as well. In player expectations, and players kind of delivering on those contract years. I think he's one of those guys that I'd be betting on that's capable of earning himself some money this season, especially after everything that he's shown so far in his career. Really good tackler as well because of those box snaps, and then you combine that with potentially even more snaps, just spread out throughout the field. I like this as being potentially, his best season of his career.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I don't think it'd be foolish to predict the Patriots to abandon their approach to involving 3-4 guys at the back end there. And for a start, none of these guys is a true deep safety in the mold of a McCourty. But there's that sort of degree of uncertainty that brings to the table, I guess. But I do like what I liked in particular was the back end of last year when Duggar averaged an 88% snap share over the final 8 games, outsnapping Adrian Phillips over that period, which was a reversal of what we saw in 2021. Now, I wouldn't be massively surprised if things change going into next year, but I think, as I said before, the pecking order's changed, and Duggar's near the top, if not at the top now. So I like his chances to have a bigger year than last year. I think it could be a career year. Yeah, I think he's a pretty solid choice as a breakout, if I do say so myself.
Yeah, I'm with you. I love Kyle Duggar, consistently kind of ranking him fairly higher than most people as well. So hoping for his best year so far. Let's go to one more safety here. So one guy that I chose was Derek Forrest. So another safety, much like Ryan Neal, who kind of emerged as like an in-season waiver target last year and then kind of greatly outperformed expectations. But he didn't really get like a consistent every down role until week 10. Even, after posting, I think 88 total tackles, I think there's still kind of room for him to improve and end up with a career year for IDP production. From a guy that was drafted, I think, a 5th round. Yeah, it was a 5th round pick in 2021. Forrest, he also came up with 4 interceptions last year, which all came in games where he exceeded 95% of the team's defensive snaps, which is important. We got Cameron Curl there. He figures to, I think, dominate the box snaps for the team, similarly to last season. He played 51% of his snaps in the box. So still an opportunity, I think, for Forrest to rotate down and share some of those duties and let him to continue to put up tackles at a high rate. We did see that a little bit last year, where Forrest averaged 33% of his snaps in the box while Cameron Curl was in the lineup. So Curl still averaged a very high 50.3%. That third of defensive snaps obviously being key, as I mentioned earlier, to create that above average tackle efficiency for the position. And while the interceptions may be difficult to replicate, he's at least shown like a propensity for them, helping his upside to finish even higher than, maybe into that top 20 IDPs at his position.
Yeah. Forrest is he's a favorite of mine again to break out this year. He started kind of fast with Curl out to start the year, and then his, like you said, his snap share dropped off until week 10. But from there on out, I don't think he even missed a single snap. Bobby McCain is gone, and although McCain was a slot DB, I don't think that would really affect Forrest much. The only question mark for me is where they put, I don't think this is a big worry, but where they put Jartavius Martin. He's that hybrid DB that they drafted in the second round, wasn't it? End of the second round. I don't think it affects Forrest much, but I'm curious as to see what happens there. We'll see.
I was kind of viewing him as like a slot corner. So I think he could potentially play that role a little bit more often. And then, you got obviously Derek Forrest, and Cameron Curl to an extent to play more the typical safety role. But yeah, the way I was kind of projecting them, and who knows if this ends up being the case, was Martin in the slot, and then Curl and Forrest as the top two safeties.
Yeah, can see that happening.
All right, let's go to the edge position here. And another personal favorite you got here, for me at least. Who is your edge rusher in Miami that you got as a breakout?
So Jaelan Phillips. And I did kind of toy with this one as a breakout because we've already seen him play really well last year, but I still think he's flying under the radar a little bit. He's going behind guys like Kayvon, Thibodeaux in the IDP show best ball drafts, and I don't really agree with that placement. I think that's pretty crazy. I think maybe people are just excited about last year's draft still. Phillips finished with 9 sacks, 70 pressures, 53 combined tackles. That's really solid production from a second year player, right? But I think it's even more impressive when we start to put that into context. 19 other edge rushers produced more sacks than Phillips last year, but only 5 guys produced more total pressures, which is a metric that we care greatly about. And all 5 of those guys that finished ahead of him and the 4 behind him rushed the passer more often than Phillips did. His 14.6% pressure rate finished 6th amongst all edge rushers, just 0.3% behind the guy who placed 1 ahead of him on the list, Myles Garrett. And those 53 combined tackles ranked 10th amongst all edge rushers. Looking forward to this year. He obviously has a new DC. I've read or heard somewhere else that Fangio likes to rotate his edge rushers. And, almost all DCs like to rotate edge rushers to a point. But the question is really to what extent. That's what matters here. And the last time we saw Fangio was in Denver in 2019 to 2021 as a DC anyway. And in that time, obviously, Von Miller had a huge role. He's a generational talent, so it's probably not the best comparison. But we saw some inferior talent in guys like Baron Browning and Malik Reed and Jeremiah Ataochu, probably butchered his name there, all logged 80% plus snap shares on a regular basis for spells under Fangio. And none of them come close to Phillips' ability for me. So, granted, the depth in Miami is a little better than what the Broncos had back then. Chubb's there, and he's obviously going to play a ton given what they paid to acquire him. I heard you talking about Chubb on the pod you did with Tom last week. Agree with everything you guys said there. Ogba's still kicking around, despite the huge drop off we saw from him last week before the pec injury. Everyone else there is just nothing special. So I think realistically, hopefully, I think it's hopeful that Phillips' 74% snap share last year could increase. Whether he'll live in that sort of 85 to 90% range that we saw from him in the last month of last year kind of remains to be seen under the new DC, but it's well within his range of outcomes. I'm a big Phillips fan. One of the other points you mentioned with Tom was a really good one, which was about how often Phillips dropped into coverage. Looked into it in a bit more detail after hearing you talk about it, John, and he did so on 11.7% of his snaps. That's a huge number. And again, talking about the new DC, Fangio, when he was last in charge of a defense, the top defensive end or edge rusher who drops into coverage was Malik Reed, who did so with only 5.2% of his snaps. So that gets me kind of really excited to see what Phillips can do when he's tasked with just getting after the QB more often.
For sure. Yeah. And like you said, like if he does see a snap increase overall, and then you combine, another 50 snaps rushing the passer where he doesn't need to drop into coverage as well. I mean, his potential, I think, to hit double-digit sacks, it should be a lock this year as long as he's healthy. I absolutely love Jaelan Phillips this season. I think most people are tuned into his potential. Maybe not, like you said, some of the ADP is still a little questionable for him, but definitely still worth noting because he's probably in the best spot, I think, to reach kind of new heights with his production. He did finish dead last in the sacks versus expected for the edge position last year, minus 4.3, which is driven by his elite pass rush metrics and playing time, both of which are much more stable than those sack totals. So in 2021, we know who finished dead last in sacks versus expected. It was Max Crosby. He finished the year as the overall edge one in most leagues. So if not the overall IDP one, if your scoring is done correctly. So Crosby, he was a lock for me last year to finish top 5 at the position. I think I had him as edge 4 going into the year. I don't think Phillips is maybe that much of a lock for top 5, but it's fairly close. I don't think top 10 really should be an issue for him. Again, if he's healthy and for all the reasons you laid out, it was what did he have? 89.8 pass rush grade. So 6th among all edge defenders, elite numbers across the board as a pass rusher. And then obviously the strong tackle numbers as well only help his case. So very, very excited about Jaelan Phillips last year or this year. You'll find him in my top 10 rankings for sure.
Yeah, I mean, were you surprised to see how much of a jump he made from year 1 to year 2? I mean, that's it's not unheard of, but it's rare, right?
Yeah, I think that early on it was a little bit surprising because he had the sack numbers in year 1, but he didn't necessarily have the pass rush metrics, which very similar to Max Crosby in a way, right? Because he did kind of the same thing for his first 2 seasons. But I loved Jaelan Phillips coming out. I thought going into the draft, I was surprised that he wasn't like the consensus kind of edge one. Joey and I talked about it at the time as well. And I guess part of that was there was concern about his injuries and the concussions and stuff like that. But he just clearly had everything going for him. He just had all the tools. He had a refined pass rush toolbox and everything coming out. And he was a good run defender, which he's already shown in the NFL as well. But definitely surprised that he took a bigger jump from year 1 to 2. I would have expected it more for maybe year 2 to 3 or beyond that, because that's typically been the case with edge defenders, which we'll talk about in a second. But yeah, it was a little bit of a surprise for sure.
He's another guy as well who's talked about what a fantastic offseason he's having, which is again pinch of salt type stuff, but maybe slightly more important. Fangio has talked about how much he likes Phillips and Chubb's, in fact, work ethic, which was good to see. He wasn't effusive with his praise, but it was positive nonetheless.
Yeah, it's always nice to get the positive news, right? Like as long as we're not getting the negative stuff out of camp, I think we just kind of roll with it as it comes out. But it is still nice to hear. Yeah. All right, let's go to another edge defender. Actually, another edge drafted in the 2021 draft class, much like Jaelan Phillips. So I went with Odafe Oweh. So with the Baltimore Ravens, Oweh really kind of stands out to me as a player that I think everyone is kind of sleeping on and underrating right now. I'm not totally sure why, because if it's the sack totals, I don't know, how many more times we kind of have to go over this, but I figure people would learn by now. They don't matter. They're wildly unstable year to year. That finisher rate is not a thing if you do the research. There are much more important metrics to rely on when assessing defensive linemen. And if you're looking at just sack totals, unfortunately, you're doing it wrong. It's going to put you behind the 8 ball more often than not. So I do get that, 3 sacks last year was really annoying and disappointing, but you kind of have to leave that in the past for the next season, or, it's how you miss out on a Max Crosby or a Jaelan Phillips, for example. But of course, Oweh, he didn't necessarily have the pass rush metrics that a Crosby and Phillips did or did, but he's also only played 2 seasons in the NFL. So I did send out a tweet last week sometime looking at defensive line development and production as they go through the years. And in general, looking at edge defenders through the first 2 seasons in the league, that's when they're the most underwhelming. And those end up being kind of the least productive seasons for the first half of their careers, at least. So I put up a chart here on YouTube for those that are maybe listening here, but you see a pretty clear development from years 1 and 2 to years 3 and 4, years 5 to 6 in those pass rush metrics, which also create the sack totals. But when you add the caveat of first round edge defenders, which Oweh is, and include those pass rush metrics, they get even better as the years go on. So there's still very clearly a below average rate in years 1 and 2. But if you look at Oweh specifically, he's already kind of had above average pass rush ability. Looking at his win rate specifically, 15.8%. He's winning his reps at a high rate, but they just haven't translated to pressures or sacks, whether it's the ball getting out too quickly or him getting picked up by a secondary blocker or whatever. But that win rate is important as is his expecting playing time, because he should once again lead all 8 Ravens edge rushers in snaps as he did last year. So those things, combined will allow for an increase in pressures and sacks, but also tackles, and tackles are a key part of a player's floor. And he was great in that regard last season. He posted plus 7.1 tackles over expected, which ranked inside the top 20 at his position. For me, I just think, as far as criminally undervalued players right now, he's a big one for me. I've seen some, kind of borderline disrespectful rankings of him this offseason. So I think people should be able to at least capitalize on this and get him at a great value as well, because I do think he's a really good player. He just because he hasn't shown, the 80, 90 pass rush grades, things like that, doesn't mean he can't get to that point. The athleticism is off the charts as well, which is a key thing that I'll talk about again a little bit later for guys that do have that athleticism, but maybe not refined pass rushers. They tend to develop a little bit later as well. So, I mentioned it in the tweet that I sent out. As long as the pass rush metrics for a player like this aren't abysmal in the first 2 years and you can expect similar playing time, you should absolutely expect the development in their pass rush metrics and their production as well. So Oweh stood out as the very clear kind of poster boy for that progression that I was talking about.
Interesting. You make a strong case, because I was one of those people, or am one of those people who probably behind the curve a little bit on Oweh, or at least pretty much equal with consensus. Maybe sounds like you're obviously higher on him than me. I was unsure what to make of Oweh at times last year. I didn't really see that progression from year 1 to year 2 that I hoped to see, because I did really like him coming out, and I kind of thought that going into year 2, maybe I was a bit premature. Maybe I thought that he could take some strides forward, but I didn't really see that. And then towards the back end of the year, he was playing a really healthy snap share at the start of the year. Towards the back end of the year, less so, sharing with like 3, 4, 5 other guys. I was slightly optimistic going into this year. Not as much as you, because of the absence of JPP and Houston. A couple of vets that they jettisoned from the roster there. Almost 1,000 snaps vacated at the position. Someone's got to inherit those, right? And obviously Calais Campbell's gone, although he was more of an interior guy at that point in his career than we've seen in years past. Obviously, David Deablo is going to inherit some of those snaps as well as Oweh. But that's what I like. But as I say, what I don't like was the fact that I didn't really see that improvement going into year 2 that I hope to see. That gives me any optimism around the fact that he could make further improvement going into year 3. But it is nice to hear about the win rate. I wasn't aware of that. So, yeah, good info.
Yeah, he's a weird one, right? Because he doesn't necessarily stand out when you look at like the pass rush metrics, for example, right? Because some of these other guys really do, and they do show that improvement. But see, I kind of clump like year 1 and 2 together for a lot of the times, because it just takes so long for defensive linemen to adjust to the NFL. One season typically isn't enough for that true breakout to kind of happen. So that's kind of why I was looking at Oweh more so this year than I would have like last year, for example. But yeah, if it doesn't work out, I mean, look, he doesn't cost much in drafts at all. I like you said, I think a lot of people have a similar mindset. They've kind of written him off, but I'm not ready to do that just yet. I think, there's still plenty to like about him. And I do think, that playing time shouldn't be a concern for this season, but we'll see if he doesn't improve this year, or if he falls, if he shows a decline this year, then that's a little bit more concerning. But obviously, talking about him the way I did, I expect that production and those metrics to improve this season. So we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Thinking back, I can't be surprised at the huge leap that Jaelan Phillips has made, and then be disappointed with the with the lack of a leap that Oweh has made. There's got to be some middle ground there. So yeah, I'm willing to wait. I haven't yet written him off. I was just underwhelmed is probably the best way to describe it. But I'm open-minded, so let's see what happens this year. And even if he has a poor year this year, it's not the end of his career. So
yeah, I think that's a fair way to look at it for sure. And it shouldn't be. Yeah, I think feeling underwhelmed with his first 2 seasons is fair as well. So. All right, let's go to another guy that I think a lot of people have also been underwhelmed with so far. Who do you got as your next breakout at the edge position?
Yeah, I mean this one kind of ruffle some feathers. No, I left. I'm talking about Chase Young. So I left. I heard a collective groan there from your listeners, right? So I left Chase Young out of my top 10 IDPs when I was talking to Sticky Z, Adam Zekas, about the top 10 IDPs in the NFC East on the IDP After Show last week. And I stand by that. But I looked through the list of possible breakouts at the position for 2023, and I just couldn't make a reasonable argument for slotting any of the guys I had on my shortlist ahead of Young this year. And for the record, my shortlist included Charles Omenihu, looming suspension, Michael Hecht, again, not a big enough sample size to really know what he is, Cameron Thomas, who's got to share time with BJ Ojulari, Sanders, and possibly Zaven Collins, if we're to believe the hype about him moving to the edge. And then Okoronkwo, who I've cooled on a little bit since the signing of Zadarius Smith. So I went with Young. Look, we know he's been a major disappointment since he entered the league, despite that sort of promising rookie year. Injuries have undoubtedly been a major factor in his story so far. But I'd be remiss not to mention he was disappointing even when healthy. To start 2021, remember that year when everyone was getting on the Commanders about the fact they had such a good defensive line, but the 2 edge players weren't quite delivering. The Commanders know about his disappointing ways more than anybody, hence why they declined his 5th-year option. But assuming he stays healthy, and I know that's a big assumption, big if, right? There's every chance that this year could be his best year. He's got everything to prove in an attempt to try and rescue his career and prove to the Commanders or his next team that he's worthy of that big fat contract and a starting spot, I guess. It's not accurate to say it's now or never for Young, but this year is as pivotal for him as it is for any player I can think of really in the NFL. He's spoken positively about where he's at with his health, describing his sort of situation as night and day compared to where it was. I think it was at this time last year. Ron Rivera has also sounded, encouraging. He said encouraging things about Young's chances this year, sort of likening what he could do to what Daron Payne did last year. Again, we take this off-season talk with a pinch of salt, but we know all about Young's potential. That's never been in doubt. The question is always and still remains: can he put it all together? Can he deliver? Can he stay healthy? Potential aside, what I like about his situation over some of the other guys I mentioned earlier on my shortlist is his opportunity, and that's something I've talked about with pretty much every player on this list. So Montez Sweat's going to play a lot. The only other guy I can see on the roster that's going to eat into this snap share, into Young's snap share, is F.A. Abada, who I've obviously got a bit of a soft spot for, given his UK connections. But I think in a healthy contract year, Young has as good a chance as any to deliver his best season yet. And I'm not 100% confident. I'm not 100% confident about any of these guys. But I like his chances. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, honestly, I think that's fair. I'll take some of the groans that are targeted at you. I'll help you out there because I kind of love it. I mean, I think this is another guy where the hate has just kind of gone way too far for Chase Young. I get it to an extent. He has yet to live up to the hype of a former 2nd overall pick. but injuries they're a killer. That to me, it's hard to blame a guy. That alone, I don't think is enough to write the guy off, in my opinion. And look, last year he played 63 pass rush snaps. That's it. He shouldn't be judged on that small of a sample size. It's ludicrous. That's close to like what Max Crosby was doing in one game last season. So, if Max Crosby has one down game, we're not going to shit on him, or at least I'd hope not. So instead, you kind of look at those first two seasons where, again, he dealt with injuries in both of those seasons as well, but he still posted above average win rates and pass rush grades in those seasons, suffered the same kind of finishing issue that we talked about with Oweh. So, yeah, I mean, people hate Chase Young right now, but again, they're calling him, overvalued, a bust, etc. I'm kind of with you, and I think that he could very well be a value if he stays healthy this season. And like you said, it's a big if. Or is it? We don't know. Is injury prone really a thing? But he's probably, as far as guys that are good bets to finish inside the top 12 at their position who are currently being drafted, or will be being drafted outside the top 24 at their position. I'd bet on Chase Young to do that if he's healthy. You look at his athleticism, the pass rush profile, combined with, again, the playing time, like you said, an opportunity on what should be an elite defensive line. I'm in. I'm not ready to give up on Chase Young just yet. I think it's fair that he could very well improve this season and start to show all the hype that he was generating early in his career. Maybe not all of it, but at least show some of it to give people hope again. And it's just going to come down to getting healthy. If he doesn't miss much time this year, that'll be the main thing. And then people will start to warm on him a little bit more, but get on it early. It's okay to bet on him now that he's going to be outside of the top 20, 24 at his position in drafts, because he's got the high upside if things go well.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think you could acquire Young for at the moment in redraft? And same question in Dynasty. I mean, I think you could get him pretty cheap. Depends on what the owner's perception of him is, like always. But yeah, I mean, his values come right down.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like for Dynasty, I've sent out trades for him before as like, I'll send out like a package of players, typically guys that are, getting at least some hype on offense this season that aren't, necessarily like top 24 wide receivers or anything, but they're close to that range. Plus, another DB or something like that I don't give a shit to move off of, just to see kind of where people are at. We're at the non-paying attention portion of the off season where most fantasy managers don't even respond to trades. So I found that I'm not getting a ton of responses there. So I'm not getting a rejection or an accept on the trades. But
that's the Jon Macri factor built in. Everyone knows in your leagues that you know what you're talking about, and if you like a guy, there's got to be a reason.
It does happen quite a bit, actually. It's kind of sad. I tend to not be able to make trades for defensive players at all.
And also because you share your views on these guys, and everyone knows what your honest opinion is. So yeah, they listen to your shows, and they're like, right, I'm not selling that to Jon. No.
Yeah. So hopefully, I could try to sneak a couple in throughout the off season, but it's hard. It's hard to make a trade for me, anyways. I've found, but. Yeah, well, I'll keep trying for Chase Young because I'm with you. I think there's a potential to buy low there if somebody's ready to give up on them and is feeling that level of hate that so many of IDP managers are seeming to feel. I'm noticing it more maybe for redraft where people are just completely ignoring him more so than Dynasty, because in rookie drafts you typically spent like maybe a late first on him to acquire him, at the very least an early second. So it's a little bit harder to get dynasty managers to move off of him, but in redraft, I think it'd be fairly easy to acquire him at a value in drafts.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to another edge rusher here. So another one of those guys, since we're into those, 2020, 2021 draft class guys, I'm going with Kwity Paye. So Pay, another one of my guys that might be a favorite target again. Nobody's really paying attention to because 6 sacks last season and just 4 as a rookie. So relatively quiet start to his career for a former first round pick. But again, we're going to keep hammering away at this here because that production is literally right on par with what to expect from even first round edge defenders in their NFL careers through their first 2 seasons. So especially, I hinted at it earlier, but for a guy like Pay, who has that elite athleticism that pushed him into that first round, really helped his draft capital. These are the guys who we typically see take a little bit longer to develop, like a Rashawn Gary, potentially a Trayvon Walker in the next year or two. Once they combine that athleticism and pass rush prowess at the next level, that's where we might just start to see some real returns from these guys as far as production goes. So the signs are there when you dig into it a little bit more with him. The win rate has been strong, so right on par with kind of the first and second year edge defenders at 11.6%. Pressure rate slightly below average at 10.2%, but I think there is a more important piece to that as well, which is, he has a low rate of cleanup and unblocked pressures, which was just 26.5% of his total pressures last year. So well below average for the position, and actually a top 10 mark for the position last season. So this kind of tells me 3 things. One is that he isn't getting those kind of longer drawn out plays that create late pressures and add to his pressure total. 2 is that he isn't getting around. He isn't getting the help around him to kind of flush some of the flush the quarterback in his direction for those additional cleanup pressures. And 3 is that his pressures are earned at a higher rate than the average edge rusher as well, making his wins cleaner, less reliant on others, which is a better sign for long-term stability as well for pressure rate. So, you look at him compared to a guy like Sam Hubbard, for example, last season. Sam Hubbard had 51 total pressures, but 62.7% of his pressures came from him either being unblocked or cleaning up someone else's initial pressure. So a DJ Reader, for example, spoilers for another player listed here in a bit, and Trey Hendrickson are the 2 guys that come to mind who were both well below average in cleanup and unblocked pressures for their position, by the way. So again, you got to take all this kind of stuff into consideration, along with, his high end playing time, which I think he can also rack up tackles as the Colts top edge this season. I'd expect a much better year from Pay in 2023 when you also include kind of that natural development for the edge position. So I'm pretty excited about Kwity Paye this season. Again, not a guy that's going to cost a lot in drafts, but someone that I like to scoop up a little bit later.
Yeah, I mean, you covered most bases there with Paye. The tackle volume, I like to see that increase last year quite significantly, despite playing fewer snaps, which was good to see. Are you, or how concerned are you with Ebukam coming in, or does the departure of Ngakoue offset that for you?
Yeah, that's kind of the way I was looking at it, right? I think Ebukam could be a good starter on the opposite end of Kwity Paye. And I think, for me, he might profile a little bit more as like a pass rush specialist in that kind of Ngakoue role. So I wouldn't worry about him kind of eating into maybe Paye's like early down snaps or run defense snaps. And I think there's still an opportunity there for Paye to potentially produce the tackle numbers and then obviously the pass rush numbers as well. So wasn't too concerned about Ebukam.
Okay, because obviously Odi Ingbo is going to be playing a role as well.
Sure.
He had a fairly healthy snap share towards the end of the year, but maybe we are in that sort of situation now with some of these guys where we have to accept that there's not going to be two clear starters all the time, and if they run 3 deep, that's perfectly acceptable. That becomes the new norm.
Yeah. And I think we're like, for where he's going in drafts, typically, outside the top 24 or so, you kind of run out of those like true, like every down edge rushers anyway. So you're getting him amongst a group where he could potentially be playing more than the average guy in that range. So that's kind of factored into it as well for me.
Right. Yeah, I like it. I like the choice.
All right, let's go to the defensive tackle position. So we mentioned him just a few minutes ago. Who would be your top breakout for the interior of the defensive line?
Okay, yeah. So this is if the young pick didn't ruffle feathers, then this one might do. But this is the least, just for listeners' sake, this is the least sexy pick of my breakouts so far. I admit it. It's DJ Reader in Cincinnati. Now, like I say, it's not a trendy pick, and I do feel like he's flown under the radar in IDP circles. The main reason for that, I think, is that he's not a flashy player. He's never been particularly special as a pass rusher, and while his run defense has always been very good, he's always been one of those guys that's just more valuable to his NFL team than he is to us in fantasy. With that said, I think he has demonstrated some progression as a pass rusher in recent years. And I think there's a good chance we'd be talking about him a little more if he hadn't missed significant time in the last 2-3 years, 19 games over that period. In 2022, his 10% pressure rate tied for 13th amongst 106 interior defensive linemen who played at least 350 snaps. And that was just 0.1% behind Aaron Donald. Well, no, again, didn't have his best year, but even so, it's good company. Mm-hmm. I mean, look, he's never going to be the kind of player to put up double-digit sacks. It's just not who he is. You're far more likely to find the next DT1 in the current crop of rookies. I think, Jalen Carter, maybe Khalid Kansi. But Reader is a guy who's made strides in terms of being able to pressure the quarterback. And I think, again, I'd be remiss not to mention his tackle volume, 50 combined tackles in his last full season in the league. I think that's quite nice. I think what's a really thin position in IDP, and assuming Reader can stay healthy, you could do a lot worse than take a dart throw on him as a DT2, maybe a DT3 in deeper leagues, and just cross your fingers that he can stay on the field. Health permitting, I think he's got a pretty good chance to put up a career year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm with you. I think he's another kind of perfect example of maybe people getting too invested in last year's sack totals. Obviously, he had 0 last year, but career high pass rush grade, 84.3 across just 10 games. He was dominant across the board. He had an 87.3 overall grade, which was the 6th best among interior defenders. I think he is a very undervalued asset right now, and absolutely someone who could pop off this year and give people kind of a fantastic boost at the DT position. Again, looking at some of those high end wins we mentioned, or I mentioned the low cleanup and unblocked pressure rate just a few minutes ago. Those types of wins are going to lead to production more often than not. Sometimes it just takes a year to come to fruition, right? So I'm with you. I'm totally down for DJ Reader as like a high end, even a high end DT2 this season. I think he has that potential in him.
Yeah, and he costs nothing. Yeah, another one of those guys that's going to cost you nothing. He's probably on waivers in most leagues. So
very possible.
Yeah. Okay, who's next?
All right, I got another defensive tackle here. So I went with Christian Barmore and of the New England Patriots. And again, I'm pretty sure I put Barmore on this list last year, but because it didn't go exactly the way I wanted to, thanks to injuries, I'm doubling down here. I make the rules. I'm allowed to repeat names if I please. But so last year, I would have almost assuredly mentioned that Barmore is, in his rookie season, posted the 2nd most total pressures from a defensive interior player since 2006 with 48, even more than Aaron Donald as a rookie, 2nd only to Leonard Williams. So the big crazy thing, yeah, it's nuts. He even had a better pressure rate than Aaron Donald in that time as well, or as a rookie as well, which is crazy. So, you look at Barmore, and the big thing for me last year, and heading into last year and still is this year, is a combination of the playing time and the pass rush metrics, much like a lot of the names on this list. But last year, he only played 10 games due to injury, so we didn't get that big snap and production increase that I was hoping for, obviously. However, his snaps on a per game basis essentially stayed the same, but he improved in key areas, including his overall grade. His tackling grade saw a big bump because he didn't miss a single tackle, going from a 54 grade to a 77.4 grade. And then he even increased his pass rush grade, going from a 75.5 as a rookie to an 80.4 last year, which was a top 10 mark at the position. He also kept those cleanup pressures to a minimum at just under 22%. As well, which is also below average. The problem was just 2.5 sacks. So, okay, not great. Obviously, again, we're not looking at last year's sack totals anymore. Hopefully, everyone is keyed into that by this point in the pod, and instead, we're trying to predict, improvements in that production by looking at some of the key underlying metrics, which is how we should be coming up with more breakouts at the defensive line position. And Barmore, I think for me, checks all the right boxes for increased sack production. He had a 10.4% pressure rate, which is good for 15th best at the position last year, 17.1% win rate, which was good for 6th best last year. And of course, the 80.4 pass rush grade, which ranked 8th last year. So big play DT required leagues should absolutely be valuing Barmore amongst the top 12, 15 players at his position going into this season, with a chance to potentially even outperform that capital once those sacks do start to hit. So I'm still very much in on Barmore breakout season after it got kind of put on hold last year thanks to the injuries.
Yeah, I really like Barmore as a player too. I've been on board since I saw what he did in his rookie year. Like you say, obviously missed a lot of time last year, but he was an impact pass rusher when healthy. Always generates good volume. Like you said, his sack numbers have yet to catch up with that, or in that sense. But we know there's a good chance that will change if he can continue to bring pressure at similar rates going forward. The only thing that gives me pause for thought where Barmore's concerned is the playing time, even when healthy. Is he ever going to generate this sort of the same sort of snap share or earn the same snap share, if you like, as those guys above him on that list, John, the Chris Jones, the Jeffrey Simmons, the Dexter Lawrences? I can't imagine, and under the current scheme at least, Barmore ever earning a snap share enough to really vault him into that top tier. Maybe that's not maybe I need to just adjust my expectations a little bit and accept that, a fringe DT1 season is fantastic, really, and can be very valuable on fantasy rosters. But it's the snap share when healthy that concerns me. Rotating with guys like Devon Godshow and Lawrence Guy, and there's one other chap who I didn't even realize he was rotating with until I looked it up a few weeks ago. That's my only concern. Not him as a player, but the scheme that he's in, and will he earn sufficient snap share to really vault him into that top tier? I think he's got the talent, and it's frustrating. But yeah, will he get there because he plays so few snaps compared to those really high end DT ones?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the thing, right? It's a fair concern because he doesn't really play like the early downs. He's been kind of used as more like a passing down defensive interior player, so he might not have the tackle floor. It actually kind of similar to like a Chris Jones, kind of a Chris Jones light, or somebody that I kind of project him to develop similarly to is Chris Jones, because Chris Jones also kind of not very good at run defense, didn't get a lot of those snaps early on. So could potentially get there. That's kind of the hope, but it's absolutely a fair concern because right now he hasn't got it. And if Belichick doesn't view him as that guy, he's not going to try to force him into that role either. Right. So that's kind of why, I do mention like the big play type leagues, because I think for somebody like Barmore, that's where he's going to be more valuable. He's not necessarily going to provide a good weekly floor because he might not get the tackles, but he has the chance at least for more of the sack upside. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a small concern. I'll say that. I roster him in quite a lot of places. I've got quite a lot of exposure to Barmore, and I'm waiting for him to as I say, create a higher rate of sacks given the pressures he's bringing. I'm hoping he doesn't turn into kind of a Kenny Clark light of late.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, I don't see that happening. That's a bit of an anomaly, a bit of an exception to the rule. So, but yeah, I really like Barmore. That's just my only small concern was the snap share relative to the guys that are above him. I think he's got the talent. I'm just desperate to see him play more. That's really what it is.
Yeah, for sure. And he might not, at least not in New England, right? Because of the way that they like to rotate there. But so yeah, very, very fair concern with Christian Barmore. For me, it's just the hope that we start to get better sack production, which will help kind of level things out a little bit.
Yeah.
Because 2.5 sacks obviously is not going to make it worth it for anybody to invest in him. But if he starts to get into that 5-6 sack range, that's where we might start to find a lot more value out of that player. So
hey, don't feel bad about suggesting a 2.5. I had DJ Reader who's
right.
had no sacks last season. So hey,
fair enough.
You're looking better than me.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so let's go on to our last position group here. Like I said, we even have corners to talk about. We got one each. Jase, who is your breakout corner?
Yeah, so predicting cornerback production in IDP can be a lot of fun, right? It's a bit of a crapshoot, but with that said, I think there's a lot to like about this guy. I've gone with Trent McDuffie. I think there's a lot to like about him heading into 2023. He's he suffered that hamstring injury early last year, which kind of slowed his start to the year, but he never looked back once he returned, playing a sort of a near every down role for the Chiefs after their bye in week 8. We all saw what L'Jarius Sneed could do in the slot role. But Sneed was moved back to outside corner for the final 3 or 4 regular season games, and it was McDuffie who replaced Sneed in the slot, and in fact for 2 of their postseason games as well. And it was no surprise that his tackle rate improved significantly as soon as he moved into that role. Delivered 36 tackles over that period of time, an average of about 6 tackles a game. Pretty good for a corner. He also managed 3 of his 6 pass breakups in that role, and even forced a couple of fumbles. These are impressive numbers for sure, right? I know it's a small sample size. And we'll clearly need to keep an eye on McDuffie's usage and role early into next season to see whether that continues, because there was one game in the postseason where they switched it back up again and put Sneed back in the slot. But I'm assuming that was a matchup thing because once again, they went back to McDuffie again the game after. So I'm encouraged by what we saw from Sneed in that role. I think everyone's gone crazy for Sneed this year. And I think McDuffie has a chance to at least replicate some of that going into next year if he can keep that role. At worst, you've still got a high draft capital cornerback who's going to play 100% of snaps on your roster. At best, as I say, could inherit some of Sneed's lucky charms. See what happens.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we saw, like you said, what L'Jarius Sneed did last year. He was incredibly effective as an IDP corner. But yeah, his role or, his production, a lot of that had to do with because of the role that he played in that Chiefs defense. It was a significant part of it, at least. So playing from the slot, lining up closer to the action, and in the box at times, while also given that kind of opportunity to blitz and create those big plays. So I think the idea, around McDuffie kind of coming out of the slot during that one game that you mentioned, it did probably had to do more with matchups, right? Getting Sneed on the better opposing wide receivers and keeping the rookie from getting exposed, basically. Because once they started to lean into that in the later part of the year, McDuffie did see a significant increase in his production. So again, for the YouTube crowd, I've kind of laid it out a little bit here, but more snaps in the slot, rushing the passer for McDuffie in the second season, I think is going to help raise his tackle floor and that big play upside on a weekly basis, like you said. Unfortunately, I think L'Jarius Sneed is likely going to be the first corner drafted in IDP leagues this year. I mean, all I could tell you is don't freaking do it. Do not be the person in your league who drafts the first corner off the board. That repeat rate is next to impossible, and the value is just not worth it. It's the same thing when people tell you don't spend your early pick on Derwin James or whoever from the safety position. Don't do it. And at least, for Derwin James, he's shown the ability to repeat, which is, why he's the GOAT. But there's still just too much value to be had at such a volatile position. It isn't worth passing on more valuable positions for fantasy to grab a defensive back, especially a corner. don't draft L'Jarius Sneed, take the shot on Trent McDuffie later, and then hope that it works out. So, thank you for coming to my brief TED talk here.
Just on that point, about drafting him so early. Those best ball drafts from the IDP show. Just looked it up quickly to see. I was intrigued to see where Sneed was going relative to some of the other guys, and a couple of the guys that we talked about on here. So Jamin Davis, Divine Diablo, both of those are going behind Sneed in those drafts as far as their ADP is concerned. That's crazy to me.
Yeah. That's just not spending, your assets properly, in my opinion. I think you just pass, let somebody else do it, but just don't be the guy to do it when there's, like you said, every down linebackers available, potentially some of these breakout edges as well. All of those are more valuable if they hit than a cornerback in like the 9th round or whatever it happens to be that you spent a pick on him.
I can see why it's tempting. You look at the fantasy scoring finishes for last year, and you see these corners up there, alongside the likes of linebackers, safeties, DTs, DEs in these leagues. But it's about, like you said, their ability to reproduce that sort of scoring next year. You'll invariably see very few of the same cornerbacks in that top 10 list year on year.
Yeah, it's the same trend every year, right? It was Trayvon Diggs last year. It was Kenny Moore the year before. It was Marlon Humphrey the year before that, right? These guys just don't repeat. They can be good, but they're just not repeating as the top 12 corner that you're hoping them to be, because a lot of it is built on like unstable big plays for the cornerback position. So that's where we have to try to avoid some of those missteps in drafts and hopefully recoup some of the value by addressing more valuable positions. But anyway, speaking of corners, a guy that maybe you could target instead of a L'Jarius Sneed a lot later is Nate Hobbs for the Las Vegas Raiders. So, I mentioned the volatility of the cornerback position for IDP purposes. I think finding, consistency in tackle production can go a long way to creating maybe a weekly edge against your league mates, depending on those unstable big plays. So Hobbs, for me, looking at the numbers, was one of the more consistent tacklers at the position last season. Unfortunately, he only appeared in 11 games in 2022, but he still found a way to produce 72 total tackles. He managed to hit at least 5 tackles in 7 of his 11 games in 2022, which is an impressive feat for a cornerback when you consider that the average total tackles per game for the position is under 4. And then after spending, the large majority of his rookie season as like a slot only corner, he also showed off his versatility by lining up wide and in the slot in 2022. So he provided value to a key position of need for the Las Vegas defense. The Raiders did add 4 new cornerbacks to their roster this offseason, but, looking at it, Hobbs is arguably still one of the better options. So his role should be safe. I think whether they want to use him in the slot or out wide again, he'll have a place in the starting lineup, I think, as long as he's healthy. He was also the most effective corner in the league in producing tackles over expected last season. So if he can continue to do that while being on the right side of variance when it comes to big plays, I think he has the potential to be even the overall CB1 for IDP leagues this season. If we're looking for that big of an upside, I think he's one of the guys that has it for me, again, assuming health and a full-time role.
Yeah. So Hobbs was a hot name after his impressive rookie year. As a fantasy manager who had plenty of Hobbs rostered on in fantasy leagues, I was feeling pretty smug. And as a Chargers fan, I was feeling pretty jealous. So I had that was a conflict going on. He did take a step back last year when healthy in coverage, but like you say, that tackle volume, that tackle efficiency was fantastic, at a position where it's really hard to find that. So yeah, again, you covered the other point. They did bring a bunch of corners in. David Long Jr., Duke Shelley, forget the other two. They're that insignificant. I can't see any of them posing much of a danger to Hobbs going into his 3rd year, unless last year was a sign of things to come, in which case we could be looking at this next year and thinking, what were we thinking? So yeah, I think he's a shoe-in to at least start the year, and I think he will keep his role, and I think he will have a good yearly finish.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think he has a chance to kind of go back to that slot role too, which we saw
Mhm.
as a rookie, right? You look at Duke Shelley and David Long, they potentially play more on the outside there in Las Vegas. So I think there's at least a chance that the Raiders view him or like him more in the slot like they did as a rookie. And that was, again, like you said, the better year for him coverage wise as well. So
Yeah,
that would help his production also.
for sure.
All right. Well, there we have it. It was a big one today. Lots of players to talk about. What do we cover? Almost 20 different IDPs. I think it was 17 total. So lots of good info there for the people to consider now that we're getting into fantasy draft season. So hope you all enjoyed it. A huge thank you to Jase for coming on here with me and smashing all of his breakout picks for the season. Jase, I really appreciate it, man. Thank you so much.
No, thanks to you. It's it's always awesome to come on here and cut it up with you, John. As I said earlier on, I love Big Nickel. It's pretty cool to be a part of it. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, I appreciate that, man. Thank you. Again, before you go, please remind the folks where they could find you and your work.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Jase Abbey. And my work, I'm kind of thinly spread. I'm very, very busy this season. I've got obviously co-hosting the IDP After Show, which has already got off to a fast start in recent months. In season, I'm going to have some redraft weekly ranks with the IDP show as well. I'll continue having some dynasty ranks and articles over with DLF, and I'll be getting up to some sort of mischief with the IDP guys again, although I'm not entirely sure what yet.
Nice. Sounds good, man. Yeah, definitely make sure you're following Jase at Jase Abbey on the Twitter. And yeah, definitely check out his work and then on the IDP After Show as well. As for me, all my written work can be found on pff.com, which includes full write-ups on all my breakout candidates across all positions in fantasy football. So that's going to include quarterbacks, running backs, linebackers, wide receivers, tight ends, and defensive backs, which will all be out by the end of this week, followed by the defensive linemen next week. So a reminder as well, if you do want to hear me talk offensive fantasy football for some reason, you can catch me on the PFF Fantasy Podcast with Nathan Yonke, where we also have a brand new YouTube channel, so that I would greatly appreciate if you could subscribe to that over there as well. And then, of course, I'm here in the IDP show feed every other week talking IDPs, which includes next episode where the Great Dynasty Trip and I are going to talk about our favorite 2023 bounce back candidates. That should be a lot of fun as well. So until then, IDP set.